So, indeed, I am Emma, and I'm the UX lead at Frozenbyte. And we did some prototyping for the first time, or like new types of prototyping in Trine 4. First off, about prototyping, who knows what that means? Like, show of hands. Cool, almost all of you. But I'll still tell you what I mean about it. The most simple way of doing it is, I have the laser pointer, with just paper prototypes. You like maybe scribble it with a pencil or something, but you have a screen or something on paper, and you can say that, okay, where would you click, what would you do? And one of the most famous early prototypes is this one, for the Palm Pilot. That is an actual physical prototype. It's basically the paper prototype, but that's printed, and then it's glued on a block of wood. And then the co-founder of Palm literally walked around with that for months, pretending that it was a real thing, just to find out if that would work, because that was the first pocket computer that they made, or like was made, I think. So whenever anyone came in and said, you know, how about a lunch meeting next Tuesday? Oh, sure, let me check my calendar. And he would like tap around with his block of wood to figure out like where he would tap to get to the calendar and everything. But yeah, those are simple ones, and then more complex ones range to digital ones, interactive ones, that I will be showing and talking about this a bit more because it's one that we made. But yeah, for different things and different ideas that you want to test, different fidelities of prototypes work best. But you can do super fancy ones, super simple ones, and anything in between, basically. Then a little bit about Trine 4. If you don't know about it, it's a physics-based platform puzzle game set in 2.5D, meaning that all the action and movement is in 2D, and all the art and sets are done in 3D. There are 3 different characters with unique styles and skills that you can choose between. There is a very distinct and beautiful art style that it's known for. In Trine 4, there is up to 4-player co-op, both online and offline, and a mix of them. And I think it's out on all the platforms now. It's PC, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and the Switch. And yeah, as this is the 4th installment in a series, a lot of the gameplay-related prototyping was done in gray box things. So like in our engine, we already had most of the things happening, and we would try out individual puzzles or skills. So that's not what I'll be talking about today because it's not as exciting. Instead, I will be talking about what we did prototype-wise in the UI. For the first time in the history of Frozenbyte, we had a UI team. Before, we had whoever had the time toward the end of the production, meaning usually artists and often a writer, who would design and plan the menus, and then we would throw programmers at the problem until it went away, which sometimes was after launch. This time, we had a dedicated artist and a designer, me, and a programmer who was doing a lot of other programming tasks, especially as we were designing and drawing the menus, but we knew that he would be programming them in. So we made the team, especially early on. And our goals were to design and implement the menus earlier and better, and basically just take the iteration from the production or like programming part of the development cycle to the design part, and essentially cut down on the time it took to get each menu done. As a side note right now, before we go forward, I have to mention an important caveat that we have. There are tons of really awesome design tools for Mac, but we can't use any of them because our engine only works on Windows, so we get one computer, and that is Windows-based. So this is why I won't be mentioning probably the most famous prototyping tools out there. But as we had our team together, the first thing we did was sit down and figure out how we would work, like what we would do and how we would do it. Things like communication, how do we want to talk to each other? Do we want to talk face-to-face? Do we want to talk on IRC? Because people communicate differently, but most importantly, we also identified the different kind of menus that we would have in our game. And after talking about it a little bit, we identified 3 different types. First, and by far the biggest by number of screens, was basic menus, meaning options, new game, finding an online game, these sort of things. Sort of the menus that you expect to be there. The game doesn't work if they're not there, but they're not an experience in and of themselves. They just facilitate the experience of the game. Next up, we thought of level select, which is so close to the game, and because our game is so artistic, we figured that that could be more of an experience in and of itself. And skill tree is the last one, and that's kind of somewhere in between. Because it's very integral to the game and the skills, or like what you do, it should be more tied into the game world. But it also needs to be efficient like the other menus. Like you don't want to be stuck there forever finding one thing that you're interested in. At this point, we talked about prototyping and decided that we want to do that. And the goal of prototypes was not to test these per se. It was more about communicating things between ourselves and the rest of the team. So that was the focus of our prototypes. Let's go over the menus as groups of what we did and how it turned out. First off, the basic menus. Here you can see what we did before. The top 2 are from Trine 2, control settings and control mapping. They get the thing done. Like there are lists and you find out what things are and you do it. In Trine 3, we basically had exactly the same menus, slightly updated widgets, but other than that, it's just the same. And then 9 Parchments, a few years later, which is set in the same universe, though not in the series, we had this huge innovation of adding a background to the menus. Because you can see here, it kind of disappears, like it's hard to sometimes see what's going on, especially here. But here, it's like we would always know what the text would be up against, so we could make it pop out. So we figured that, okay, we didn't have data from users, like we didn't collect data in our older games, we didn't get feedback of, oh, you know what, the options menu really sucks, because these are the menus that people just work with. They don't give a lot of feedback on these sort of things. But we knew that there were easy wins to be had if we just focused on these. But basically, before and now, our idea was that these are sort of a necessary evil that we just wanted to get done as quickly as possible. So what we did was a, what's it called? Navigation flow prototype. So basically we did wireframes with Adobe XD and then made it clickable. So these are buttons and then they take you from one screen to another. You can go to the options menu and you can see that this would have a slider, this would be a checkbox, but you can't interact with those because you don't actually see the game, you don't have any sounds, so there's no point in actually adjusting anything. But you get from from this screen to the options screen, so you know how you're getting from one place to another. We did this with all of the menus in the basic menu category, and we figured this is really nifty, and made the entire dev team aware of it. We just sort of announced it. Look, this is the thing we made. Isn't it cool? And there were 2 people who said, yeah, it looks really cool. Thanks for making it. And that was the feedback that we got from generally announcing this. We did sit down with the people who we identified as key stakeholders, which in this case was one person, the lead designer, just to get an okay from the mental models we were using, the number of clicks to get from one place to another, the categorization that we used. And that was okay. But other than that, we didn't push for more feedback from the rest of the team. And because we sort of assumed, because these are a necessary evil, that just getting these done would be fine. So we didn't push for that either. At this point, what we thought was the best thing to come out of this entire thing that we made was the layout from Adobe XD that lent itself to flowcharts really easily, because we just took a screenshot and then turned it into a flowchart. Because it's so much faster to glean, okay, how do you get from start screen to host game when you have this like a list of screens to see, rather than having to click through and remember how you ended up there. So come development time, this is when people started to pay attention. Programmers, obviously, as they were programming these in, and the rest of the team as the menus were inside the game, you could play around with them. It worked out fairly well. There were some underlying issues that surfaced at this point, which no one anticipated. One of the biggest was saving, because we had a very specific sort of UI for like choosing a save file, and then the programmers came in and said they can't do this because the save system doesn't support this sort of saving, which was a surprise to both parties. And we had to sit down, talk through like what we were thinking, what they were thinking, and could we find a middle ground? No, we couldn't, so how we made one thing work than the one we picked. That took a little bit of time, not too much, and that there were only like a handful of them. I think that was maybe the only like less, like you could count them with your fingers if there were any like more problems. So it wasn't that big a deal, but it was an unpleasant surprise, let's say. As is often the case, the design had changed somewhat during, like, from the beginning when we were thinking about what menus we have to actually developing the menus, but we had made a beautiful and really good layout system for these ones. So we had like 2 different layouts that we could make all our menus on. So they would, the new menus that needed to be added were really easy to design and very easy to implement as well, because they just followed the same system that we had in place. And other than that, there was some look and feel and other changes that needed to be made, but they had nothing to do with our prototype, because that didn't have the look and feel, it just had the organization of the information and flow, and you always have to fiddle around with the look and feel anyway. Here is what the menus look like now. Obviously a lot prettier now that like there's actual art there, but basically the structure of the information and flow between like how do you get from one place to another is the same. So I count this as a win for our team. Remember, the goal was to cut down iteration from programming and bring it to the design side, and that's what we did. There was some iteration and talk, discussions before programming started, but it was sort of in between those things, so it wasn't that we had to program things in and completely redo them. So this worked out really nicely. One thing to say, if we had chosen our key stakeholders, like went wider with them, excuse me, most notably talked with programmers early on, we would have found the big issues like the save system thing earlier, and we could have figured it out before anything was done. But surprises like that always happen, and those were so quickly figured out that like it wasn't very upsetting. Going forward, we are very happy to know that Adobe XD now supports game back navigation. Remember, we're doing this both PC and all the consoles. So being able to click through with the mouse is a very different sort of thing than going through with gamepad that you have to navigate, like press a button to go down every time. And we couldn't try that out, and in the future we can. And again, go wider with the stakeholders, not only with leads from all the departments, regardless of whether we think or they think that it's important, just get it done, but also people who know about the requirements that different console providers have, because they always have a list of things that you have to pass before they allow you to publish things on their platforms or consoles. And other things like localization. We localize things on, I don't remember how many languages, but closer to 10, I think. So designing in English and then translating it to German or Spanish means that text grows quite a bit. So having someone who focuses just on localization when looking at the wireframes makes you remember that, okay, we need to figure out what happens if the text doesn't fit here. Do we make it bigger? Do we make it wrap around? What do we do? But yeah, all in all, this went fairly quickly and well. Next is level select. what we had before in Trine 2, a list of the levels, and then a wall of text of all the information that you might want to know. I'm not sure if you can make it out, this is a fairly big screen, but the point is that there's a lot of text there. There's the experience you got from different places, what your difficulties, all these sorts of things. In Trine 3, we had a 3D map, like a board game that you could run around on. Trine 3 was all in all in 3D, so the map could be in 3D. But this was more exciting. This was more of an experience, and both us as developers and our players liked this a lot more than just the list, even though it was slightly more inefficient. So we figured that maybe, we could do something more akin to that. So what we did was a map. We actually toyed around with different sort of mental models, like I think tapestries with lists, because it's set in a castle and all these sorts of things. But a map lends itself as a metaphor so easily to level select, especially because in our game you go from one place to another. Like they actually literally go on a journey and continue from where they left off in the previous level. So it worked really well. But this time it would be in 2D instead of 3D. So we had to figure out how to make navigation between levels feel good. When you're going between like this level and the next, obviously you just press a button and you're there. But what if you want to collect all the things that you missed and you want to jump back 5 levels or 10 levels? You don't want to click 10 times like going back just to get to that thing. So there was that we needed to figure out. And again, we had a very distinct and beautiful art style, and we wanted to give space for that in our level select screen as well. But there's also a lot of information, as you remember from the previous screen. There was a wall of text of information that needed to be conveyed to the player. So how do we fit both of those things without it being cluttered? So here is the prototype that was in the prototype screen as well. This is fully interactive. It's made out of assets from previous games and early mock-ups, so it's not the prettiest thing. There's also art that I made. I am not an artist, so these are my things. Woohoo. This is done in Action RP8 because it was easier to do like animation things and stuff than Adobe XD. I had to learn both tools as I was doing these, so it might be possible to do something like this in XD as well, but it was quicker for me to learn to do it here, so that's why I use different tools. This grew out of an actual need, because we were talking about what happens when you select a level, because we need to load a little bit before we can enter there, and I think we were discussing, well, you zoom in, and then it like loads in the background, and then it goes in there. And it was very upsetting to some people, because for others, like there's the house, they thought that it just zooms in so the house is bigger, and that's it, and then there's loading and you go in. And some people thought that zooming in meant that you zoom in and you're actually inside the house, so you have to have a different view to see what's happening, which means at least double the amount of work for artists and more work for programmers as well. So first what we did was a prototype just to show that what zooming in means, so we like talk about the same thing, and it kept growing and growing and ended up being a fully interactive prototype. I think actually 3, because we tried different modes of navigation on the top bar. Again, we were very excited. This is probably the coolest thing I've made in my career so far. So I was very excited. And again, what we did was announce to the team, like, look, this is a really cool thing what we made. Tell us that, like, what do you think about it? And then I think we got 5 people to tell us, wow, that is really cool. Thanks for making it. And that was it. Again, we had planned on sitting down with key stakeholders, and this time, luckily, we went a lot wider with the people we sat down with. So we sat down with, I think, at least writing, art, programming, and design. We probably should have sat down with sound and QA as well, and in the future we might. But this really, like, these were the people that we knew would have to work a lot on these things, and to get them on the same page and know that they need to take time for this stuff. So it worked out. But yeah, we hope for more feedback in general, but again, just announcing it doesn't mean that people are gonna do anything more than a superficial glance and then say, it looks nice. Once development started, things went super smoothly. Because we'd sat down with all the people who were working on it, they knew what they were gonna do. So there was a lot of work, but they just had to do it. There wasn't any of, what does this mean? Or what do they want here? They knew, and because of the prototype, it was easy for them to come back and ask, like, okay, this works this way, but do you actually want it to work this way, or do you want us to do something else? So communication was really easy. We set expectations right with this, so it was really good. And in the end, again, only minor tweaks were needed for look and feel things. Obviously, art was made to look a lot better than the prototype, and we fiddled around with how much information we displayed at different times, and again, for localization needs different amount of text for different languages. But those are fairly minor considering that was a big idea that we wanted to convey to a lot of people. And here it is now in the game. The biggest change is that we only show top level information per level before you select it. And then when you select the level, up pops more information. But here you see which characters are available in each level. The first 3 are tutorials, so you only have one of them, and in later ones you have more. There's a lot of room for beautiful art that gives you an idea of what happens in each level, so you kind of stay oriented. And on the top bar, you can either cycle through or click on any of the acts and jump multiple levels at the same time. This took a lot of work, but it didn't take a lot of iteration during the programming part, so this was spun on. We met all the goals that we set for ourselves, mainly cutting down development time in terms of redoing work. Going forward, this worked so well that we want to do more prototypes and talk to more people about them. This really proved the case for making these, so this was really good. But since that took a lot of work, actually RP8 is really close to programming, so there was a million if-else statements that I had to do. I have a programming background, so I could do that, but it took me a little while to do it. It was worth it, but since we put that much effort into it, in the future we want to do a bit more testing on it, possibly with outside people even, because even though we designed this early on, we didn't implement this in the game until fairly late, so we didn't test it with actual users or players. But even if we test it internally, it helps us get feedback and spread awareness of the design, so that's a win-win. One thing about the development, the prototype itself isn't good for as a task. You can't just give that sort of thing to a programmer and say, do this, because there's so much going on. Luckily we didn't try, but we did figure out that what we did was good. We had smaller tasks. We had written down, okay, when you select a level, these things happen in this order, and look at this prototype to get a feel of what it looks like. But it was a combination of traditional written tasks and the prototype. And it really helped not only just to convey the design between design and programming, but also later for QA, when they had to test it, they could see what it was supposed to look like and feel like. So they could tell, okay, this feels janky because it takes too long. In the prototype, it takes this long. In here, it takes this long. It's not good. These sort of things. And yeah, you can spend a lot of time working on a prototype like I did here, or if you remember the previous prototype with the wireframes, not too much. And these were both digital ones. You could just do scribbles on napkins and call that a prototype. So you can adjust the time needed to make a prototype to test things, and it's on you to find the sweet spot on how much effort you want to put in for whatever you want out of the prototype. Last up is the skill tree. Again, this is the original Trine. There are basically skills and then upgrade points for those. In Trine 2, we had like more tree-like skill tree, but here like you had experience, and once you had enough experience, you had skill points that you could spend here. In Trine 3, we didn't have a skill tree, but basically we knew, like, we had done skill trees before. These were what they look like, and it would be fairly similar to this, except this time around we had 2 types of skills. And it turns out that was a major difference, because here you had one, like, this skill point goes for any of these. Like, they might cost a different amount, but they still, like, they all work the same way. This time we had skills that you gain automatically because you get when you get enough certain kind of experience, and then other skills that you could toggle on or off. So communicating that to the players was crucial. Here is an animated GIF that we made. I can't believe I said GIF. I always say GIF. Anyway, we made an animation of our design. This shows the layout, the different kind of skills. The purple ones are the ones that you get automatically. The pink ones are the ones that you get, like, you can buy. Here is like the skill points for each one, and when you enter this, like, there's purple thing flowing in here and filling up the bars, so you know that you're progressing toward these skills. The higher the skills are, the earlier you can get them. There's a lot of information conveyed in this screen. But we did mock-ups, and then we made a few animations, and we sat down with the lead designer and I think the lead artist, and we talked this through, and they thought that, okay, this looks fine. We understand how it works. We talked about doing an interactive prototype like we did with level select. I was working on the level select one as we were discussing this, and our UI artist doesn't have a programming background, so she was uncomfortable doing that. So we would either have to wait that I would make one prototype and then I would work on the other, or she could make a ton of these animations on After Effects because she was really good at that. And we figured, we've done skill trees. They're only, like, this is fairly similar to what we've done before. Skill tree is a skill tree, and these animations really help out to figure out what's going on. We added written documentation as well. We thought that would be enough. So, to reiterate, our prototype consisted of static mockups, animations, and written documentation. This time around, we didn't even announce this with as much enthusiasm to the team. We were like, okay, well, here are designs, you can look at them if you want. There were a lot more people interested in this because this is a core thing. They asked questions, they went to look at the pictures and the animations, and they didn't understand what was going on because they didn't read the written bit. So we explained the written bit to them, and we got on the same page. They thought that this would be cool, and this was not a red flag that we noted, even though it could have been. I'm not sure if it should have been, but you will see that there were a few problems later on. Notably, there were skills added to the menu after we thought that this would be fine. Here in the image is the final layout that we did. We changed the shape of some of the things, changed the colors that we used, and added a ton of skills. So, which one of these is higher? You can't really tell anymore. Like, obviously, this is higher than that one, and that information was in the original one, but here, it's almost in a grid, but not quite, so it's just annoying to some people, especially artists. And again, the colors were confusing. Like, these are obviously different colors. This is yellowish. Which one does it go with? Probably this one, because it's more closer to yellow than this one. This is a yellowish pinkish arrow. It could be either one. So there were a lot of these small confusing things, and not so small confusing things that were adding up, that were only noted once this was programmed in the game. So after rethinking and redoing this, this is what it looks like now. Basically, the colors and the shapes are the same, but now there are icons like the star-shaped experience goes with this one, and the tear-shaped, or the pink tear-shaped, or drop-shaped one goes with this one. if it's on purple background and it's purple and there's a lock on it, you can't get it yet. These are colored in once you buy them, but these are inactive now. It's a lot simpler. And the thing is that once we were hearing that there would be more skills, our team did decide that, okay, let's take a step back and think if this is still working. And the problem is we only thought about this amongst ourselves. We were very excited about our original idea. We knew how it worked, and we just didn't see that, new players, new people wouldn't understand this, and we should have tested it at that point, which we didn't do. And yeah, it was tweaked so much that I'm willing to call it completely redesigned. Obviously, there are small things like, interestingly, the micro interactions that were animated, most of them are still there. The colors and the shapes are still there, but the general idea of how navigation goes, how things are presented, is so different and it was all done during programming. So our goals were not met. Like, this is where we missed the mark. Not super badly, because we did win in the other ones, but still, there are a lot of things to learn here. So going forward, obviously, test more. It's easy to say that we couldn't have done that because we had the interactive things with the other ones. But at the beginning, I told you about paper prototyping, and we had really fancy paper prototypes to go with. Like, we could print them and cut things and like really do really proper and really nice looking paper prototyping that we just never did. And it would have really helped us. Probably not every time skills were fiddled with, because they were like, okay, first there were 7 skills, and then there were 8, and then suddenly 9, and then we went back to 8. Like, there was some going back and forth. There were some skills that were like thought about and never added to the thing, so it was nebulous, the amount of skills that we had. But testing it regularly, say every month, every 2 months, with new people, we could have seen whether the design was still working. And that is something I suggest people do. Test regularly with what you have. Just keeping it updated for the team is not enough. Like, you don't see if it's going the wrong way. In summary, interactive prototypes are really great for truly communicating the design. Interactive does mean paper prototypes here as well. If you're there to say, okay, you click on this, now it looks like that, like you make it interactive and show what happens when people click on it. But when it's digital, people don't have to think about it as much, because they can just go, with paper prototypes, they have to think, okay, I would click here, and then something happens. With interactive ones and digital ones, they can literally just click and see what happens. So there's less thinking involved. And going through the motions shows you hidden assumptions and mental models that they have that might not be visible when you're just talking through the design of a screen or something. Again, you can control the fidelity of the prototype, so you can't say that you can do high enough quality or it takes too much time, because you can really control how much effort you put into it. And when you want feedback, first of all, you can't just expect people to give you feedback when you wish for it. And second of all, when you go ask for it, make it as easy for them to give feedback as possible. So don't just go, here is the thing, what do you think? Because they will say it looks nice. Go with specific questions that you have, like how would you start a new game? How would you select a new skill, or get rid of a skill that you don't want anymore? These sort of things. But all in all, there are a lot of things that we learned, but I would say that Trine 4 UI development really did benefit from the prototypes that we did, and we will do them in the future. Not sure if as many and with such a high fidelity, but we will definitely do them. That is it.